Zombies are no stranger to the Why You Wouldn't Survive series. We've covered them time and time again, and I even briefly went over today's zombie outbreak 2 years ago in my most dangerous zombie outbreaks video. I figured, why not cover a not infected scenario where things go from bad to worse over time? And to skip the opening one-liners, let's get straight into it. Today we are telling you why you wouldn't survive State of Decay's Black Fever and Blood Plague. Not much is known about the origins, or how or why the virus that started this all was created, with only there being ties to the non-governmental organization for scientific research, the Human Future Fund, located in the fictional city of Danforth, Washington. Researchers such as Dr. Thomas Horn and Michelle Martin had supposedly been working on a strain of a new deadly virus, and had made a decent amount of progress on whatever its intended purposes might have been. Whether it was making a bioweapon, a countermeasure to a possible bioweapon, experimentation of previous diseases and viruses that led to a mutation, making a new strain altogether, or ways to strengthen mankind. Probably experiments to either prolong human life or allow humanity to survive through end-of-days scenarios like nuclear holocausts, much like the Romero virus's origins. Before a viable cure for this disease or countermeasure was fully concocted by Dr. Horn, the disease had unexpectedly somehow breached containment and spread across the world in a very short amount of time. Wow! That's how we like to do it. The disease was labeled at its onset as the Black Fever. While this may just be a quirky name for a fictional deadly disease, it is also possible it takes inspiration or maybe even a variant of the real-world Black Fever, otherwise known as Kala Azar, Dum-Dum Fever, or Visceral Leishmaniasis. Sorry if I butchered that name, but it is a disease spread through parasites like sandflies commonly found in East to North Africa, Latin America, and some parts of Europe. Once a female sandfly latches onto a target human host, it will suck their blood, basically injecting the dum-dum parasite containing a virulent RNA virus into the bloodstream, where it spreads throughout the body, primarily the spleen, liver, and bone marrow. It is commonly misdiagnosed as malaria despite being mostly different, and will ravage the body's immune system to make someone more susceptible to other diseases like pneumonia, tuberculosis, and dysentery, often taking between 1 to 20 weeks to fully affect a host, killing upwards of 30,000 people each year. If this disease is not properly diagnosed in time, treatment will not be nearly the same, and in most cases will cause a 100% mortality rate, much like the treatments involved with the Black Fever in State of Decay. It's possible for it to spread through water sources as well, like rivers in Southeast Asia, or to be spread like smallpox when the South Sudanese Civil War in 1983 forced refugees to flee along the Nile River on foot to spread and exacerbate the infected count to around 100,000 people over the next 10 years. Even surviving this disease will have health ramifications years after the fact, with the secondary form called post-Kala Azar, or dermal leishmaniasis, causing small lesions to grow across the body and expand into swollen growths similar to leprosy, with these boils and growths potentially spreading the disease further once more. Treatment has been difficult but thoroughly studied for over a century, with resistances, compounds, and potential vaccines slowing down the infection rate and curing 95% of cases in the beginning of the 21st century. Now, it is possible the Human Future Fund saw this parasite's virility and wanted to use it for their own purposes, taking the parasite and restructuring its symptoms and side effects to create something even more powerful and deadly, but also easily treatable if given enough resources and time. Although that time was not given to them when it broke out. The biggest cause for this outbreak getting so out of control, well, it's possible that the dead or some parts of this virus were able to get into water supplies across the country, specifically starting from Trumbull Valley, effectively infecting a large majority of the area's population and therefore more and more people over time. So it's very possible that this derivative of the OG parasite could easily find its way into the consumable water sources and unknowingly infect hundreds, thousands, and possibly millions in the first weeks of its outbreak. Those Those affected without proper treatment in a relatively short time will succumb to the parasitic-like pathogen and will eventually die to their symptoms and nearly immediately come back to life as reanimated pathogenic vectors. But for people who aren't Discord-dwelling detail freaks, and for those that don't have time for that,
ain't nobody got time for that.
We're just going to be referring to them as zombies, or for my British friends out there, Zeds. Their body will simply decay, rotting sporadically all over, while their eyes will simply white out and emanate an otherworldly glow. Despite their state of decay,
He said it!
These Zeds can also gain seemingly unfiltered strength to attack and maul uninfected survivors, attempting to scratch and bite them to spread the black fever or just outright rip survivors in half. Their main prerogative is, of course, to kill and consume the flesh of the living to spread their numbers further. While the game series is all about gathering supplies, building up safe havens, gathering supplies, cooperating with survivors, gathering supplies, fighting zombies, gathering supplies, and overall surviving and fighting other survivors over gathering supplies, it's really no question at all that these factors of basic survival will come into play with this why you wouldn't survive scenario. I mean, that's the main selling point of State of Decay. It's a survival horror game with way more emphasis on survival, so it's perfect for the Why You Wouldn't Survive series. But as to not bloat it with stating the obvious or showing just pure gameplay with no narration for 2 to 3 minutes straight, we will discuss the threats that come into play against you, and not how you can't survive the harsh elements of a post-apocalyptic wasteland where you have to survive off to what you can find, and potentially dying to either hunger, thirst, or another survivor executing you, all while trying to refrain from making too much noise and drawing attention to where you are, and prevent zombies from flocking to your location and infecting you, or ripping you apart. Of course, from the start, a majority of us drinking from local water supplies ripe with these parasites would spell doom and dead and gloom to your head. As with any generic undead zombie archetype, these Zeds can only be extinguished by removing the head or destroying the brain. Pretty generic, I know, but amputating and dismembering them would only slow their movements and capabilities, but not outright kill them. They need their head, or else they won't be dead. The regular variants can come at you in a number of ways, being the generic slow-moving walkers or the hellishly fast infected-like runners. Avoiding getting nicked or chomped by these just basic goons can be rather difficult for the average Joe, and despite characters constantly getting bitten without the spread of the black fever in some cases, it's really only going to take one or a couple of instances for you to harbor the parasite and eventually succumb to the virus. So, unless you can hold off the frontline infantry of the dead by bashing their fucking brains in or landing perfect headshots on tons of them, you're gonna be switching teams rather quickly, considering the fact that they tend to group up in small groups and hordes of between 5 to 20 or even more, breaking through defenses relentlessly and wearing you down. With some of these zombies still wearing military and riot gear, that's gonna make them a little harder to kill than your average Zed. But that's just the basic level shit. Mutations of these parasites and other hosts can cause much deadlier versions of these zombies, possibly due to variables like body fat, compatible vocal cords, pre-existing conditions, or a reliance on the clothing and weaponry available on a host body upon infection and death. And these stronger zombies are known as freaks. The first of which of these being a special infected type that's pretty much in every zombie game these days, the Screamer. Having no hair on its head, a ripped off jaw, and severed arms, it's possible this freak variant was a dying survivor or former regular zombie that was mutilated in the hopes for it to become docile, since there would be no way for it to bite or scratch you. It has no arms and it has no way to bite, so surely there's no way it can be any danger to you, unless he tried to, I don't know, scrape and lick?
Dracula don't suck. Dracula scrape with his fangs and lick up the blood. Like this. See?
Well, as a response to the host body being incapacitated, losing its jaw and arms, the parasitic infection will possibly expand its lung capacity in order to scream at such high decibels that not only do zombies within a large area hear and flock to this noise, but also severely debilitate survivors in the midst of combat and possibly even rupture their eardrums, making them permanently deaf. The screamers, working to preserve themselves, will tend to stay near or around hordes of infected that can fight as they infest unoccupied structures, basically working as security for the dead. Now, much like the tanks of Left 4 Dead, Juggernauts can stand 6 feet tall with grayer skin and a bulky body mass disproportionate to their relatively tiny heads, waddling around typically wide open areas as they prefer to charge at survivors and either bitch slap them, pound them into a pulp while shaking the ground at your feet to possibly stumble you or grab you and play with your body like a deadly accordion. Despite being slow, their unnatural thickness allows them to take heavy amounts of damage from gunfire and explosives, and it can even be directly hit by oncoming vehicles and still remain standing. While it is buggy inside structures in-game, that's just the mechanics, I could really see this thing just charging through walls, breaking down buildings, just to grab you and sink its teeth into your abdomen. Something this bulky would be doing a lot more damage in a real-life scenario. Now, we do have an annoying plump individual by the name of the Bloater, and it will stand like a kid's birthday balloon if it were made by Tim Burton. This zombie's body has been basically turned into a whole unit of gastrointestinal production. But unlike Left 4 Dead's Boomer or Spitter, where bile and stomach acid are generated, instead, the Bloater's innards are built to produce toxic gases that the Bloater can exhale at high volumes to nearby surfaces and survivors. Any surface this gas makes contact with will be highly contagious just by touch for 30 seconds. If you are directly hit by this gas, or walk into and make contact with anything this gas has touched, you will become severely disoriented, experiencing immediate fatigue and a worsened state of health, with a heightened chance of contracting the black fever through inhalation. Attacking any part of the Bloater's body besides the head will cause it to explode and release an even larger plume of toxic gas in a wider area of effect. So, unless you can take it out from afar, it will slowly approach you, breathing its noxious chemicals. And if you attempt to fight back and kill it in any way, you better hit the head, or else you'll be caught within its blast radius and most likely contract the virus or die immediately. They also willingly act as veritable landmines laying out flat on roads, and if you run it over with a vehicle, they will explode, contaminating your car and the gas seeping inside of your vehicle to slowly eat away at you and all of your passengers, forcing you to slow down your car to get out or immediately jump out of a moving vehicle, only for any nearby infected to hear this explosion and flock to you while you're disoriented, or while this gas is seeping into your brain, you can get so disoriented that you'll slam into a chestnut tree.
He's about to hit
A bloater REEEE.
Now, the most deadly of these freaks are the ferals, having been mutated to nearly optimal killing potential by the parasitic black fever. Even though their eyes have all but vanished, leaving dark voids in their place, their 4 remaining senses have been heightened to hellish degrees. Moving in sporadic and jittery natures, their hands have lengthened and sharpened to eviscerating claws, and their leg muscles have been strengthened enough to allow them to pounce semi-long distances and pin helpless survivors, while also having the reflexes to dodge numerous attacks by the living, from gunfire to melee swings. Their intense speed and unpredictable nature make them a difficult target to hit and an even more dangerous foe to potentially kill or infect you. In-game, it is possible to cure the black fever if proper medicinal facilities and survivors trained in medical practices are around, but the chances of actually surviving the disease is extremely difficult. Now, I don't see you really curing yourself, unless you have a microbiologist just sitting in your neighborhood with the proper tools and setup. I don't see a cure just magically popping up and saving your life. Now, this is all if you're able to withstand the harsh elements of the land, from other survivors to finding supplies, or to its deadly zombies and their variations and tendency to call for backup or easily infect you. But these walking corpses will not be rotting away anytime soon. Relying on them to decay in piles of biomass is going to be out of the question if you're trying to survive, as the black fever and its host parasite will adapt and transform over time. Within only 18 months of the Black Fever pandemic, the disease will mutate into what would be known as the Blood Plague, an even more contagious form of the virus, slowly taking over all former Black Fever recipients over time. While being able to spread more easily through bodily fluids and direct contact, it also has had a rather aggressive approach to the zombie horde more than anything else. Zombies fully contracting the Blood Plague will become drenched in their own blood, possibly from either their skin dissolving or mostly rotting away, giving them a blood-soaked and shimmering appearance, much like the Rage infected of 28 days later. Will they always run full sprint at a survivor without hesitation, leaving none of them to be a slow, shambling generic zombie, while keeping the durability of the Black Fever zombies that can only be killed by a shot to the head. Blood Plague infected can also cause you to succumb to the infection much quicker if they are allowed to assault you unopposed for a short amount of time. Each successive scratch, bite, and hit exacerbates that parasite spread within you, allowing more of it to flow through your bloodstream and fight against your immune system with ease, causing it to fully kill you and turn you way quicker than the Black Fever ever could. It's basically the parasite becoming an impatient Karen waiting for its expired coupon to be redeemed. And that redemption will come a lot quicker with more aggression, violence, and blood spewing involved. Which, on that note, the plague will further mutate the special infected freaks to make them more lethal, causing the screamer to spew acidic blood from their gaping maw to melt away at survivors, allowing them to defend themselves more. Juggernauts that are infected with the plague will become a lot bloodier, while its melee combat will also be a much easier vector for spreading the disease, even spewing a cloud of bloodied mist when it slams its wrists into the earth to potentially be inhaled by survivors that somehow dodge its attacks. Their flesh has also been thickened enough to where fire and incendiary devices will have no effect on them, although it seems their attention span has withered away more with their tiny woodle heads, causing them to be easily distracted by any noise, even in the middle of a fight. Now, these plague-ridden juggernauts will also grow aggressive towards bloaters infected with the plague. Now, I don't know why they're attacking other infected, but they do attack them and attempt to eat them, which means this juggernaut is doing this as either a means to allow the bloaters' gases to be spread further for infection, or the juggernaut is just craving the plague bloaters' toxic gases and is just wanting to consume it since it is a purer concentration of the blood plague, being able to infect survivors extremely fast in direct contact. And the last of these freaks, the feral, when affected by the plague, will tend to want to play with their food a little bit more, dragging survivors around by their teeth as they wish. And the bottom line is they are all much more aggressive, but these variants are all being conscripted by the blood plague, not just as a viral disease taking whatever living host it can, but to also allow it to grow biomasses to concentrate its armies in even deadlier ways. At the heart of this infection are the plague hearts. Now, this can hint towards this parasitic outbreak having some modicum of a hive mind intelligence, however minuscule it might be at this point. Whenever plague infected have fully infested an unoccupied building, cave, or some sort of defensible stronghold, 4 of these common zombies can huddle up together and pretty much melt away, melding their flesh together to create what is known as a plague heart. Once these recipients have fully decayed, a glowing mass will emerge and begin to emit a deadly gas comprised of blood plague particles that can be even seen reaching the sky like a smoke signal that'll infect anyone nearby, but it will also emit a mental frequency to all nearby plague infected, signaling them to come to its stronghold and protect the heart. With this noxious gas being protruded outwards, Black Fever zombies and nearby living people can easily impair their vision and cause them to contract the disease, adding to the plague's numbers. And with further numbers comes more candidates to create plague hearts in infestable areas. The more of these plague hearts that there are, the easier it is for the blood plague to reign supreme and wrangle in the remnants of humanity. At this point, it's going to become you and everyone else's utmost concern to infiltrate and take out these hearts one by one to slowly and hopefully dampen the blood plague's outreach. But this would require tons of protective clothing, heavy ammunition and weapons, and most importantly, some kind of ventilation or gas mask to prevent breathing in any of the gas within the heart's stronghold. Not having all of these at your disposal would either force you to rush in either Leroy Jenkins style and die, or have you waiting it out in whatever safe haven you have until eventually the hordes come knocking at your door like a Jehovah's Witness.
Good morning. Are you prepared for
The blood plague's return.
Because if you're not, I have a pamphlet here that... Well, fuck you.
Infiltrations will also be a doozy because, as stated, every type of infected can be in its stronghold looking to make sure that the heart is not harmed. If you and your group somehow avoid being bitten, scratched, or mauled by the litany of zombies dwelling in these strongholds, either by means of stealth or brute force, and you somehow approach this heart, attacking the heart will cause it to panic and summon any nearby feral zombies to come and eviscerate you. Now, if you somehow survive all of this, destroying the heart will cause it to explode and release tons of the blood plague gas upon death that will remain for a time. A major positive of the heart dying is once it has fully been killed, all nearby blood plague infected will have their brains hemorrhage and immediately die. While this is extremely advantageous, there is a downside though. Any plague hearts within a few miles will be alerted by this sudden death in their ranks, causing them to increase zombie patrols and freaks within their immediate vicinity, making further excursions to destroy other hearts much more difficult. Plague hearts can eventually adapt to become impervious to gunfire, explosives, and other normal means of murder and destruction, spreading further beyond just a ball of biomass and taking over walls, crashed airplanes, and giant structures. Plague walls can block off areas that survivors use so they can be trapped within, effectively walling off settlements and areas to slowly surround and encroach on any contained, still standing survivor camps. Acting exactly like plague hearts, they will command infected to protect them and emit gases to further its reach of hosts. There is only one way to eradicate these plague walls, and that is by reverse engineering the poison glands of a plague-infected bloater to be made into explosives to destroy the walls. But again, like I said earlier, unless you are or are around someone who can somehow concoct this type of bioweapon without infecting yourself in the process, well, you're pretty damn screwed, as these walls will cut off supply and escape routes and eventually further mutate into something even more large, disastrous, and manipulative within a year's time. Now, what if you do catch the blood plague in its early stages? Surely, since the black fever had a cure that was hard to create but it was still there, surely you can find a way to cure yourself of the plague.
Yes, but actually no.
Well, for you see, you can only create a vaccine/cure by procuring good enough samples of plague tissue from zombies, freaks, and especially plague hearts. However, most of the time, the only good enough tissue that can be procured is by harvesting directly from a plague heart or being lucky enough to not taint the meat of a normal zombie or freak with sufficient blunt damage or gunfire. Once you have somehow braved the storm and acquired enough samples, you still need someone with medical knowledge who can whip up a counter to this newly formed and unknown disease in the middle of a more than 1 year long pandemic, which, for the third time, I have to really stress this, I highly doubt you're gonna find someone in the middle of a zombie apocalypse that can reverse engineer some kind of tissue from a zombie. I mean, shit, if I were stuck in this zombie apocalypse with Roanoke Gaming, I wouldn't expect the guy to somehow whip up a cure for a new plague just because I threw 5 pieces of meat at him and said, "Hey dude, you've got science skills, get to it." Overall, this disease was able to spread throughout the world pretty damn fast, and with people possibly consuming tainted water or this disease possibly having gone airborne for a short time, many of you would die in turn in the initial outbreak. As, even in the State of Decay universe, did Air Force One somehow have infected that brought down the president and much of our government. From there, you will have to survive the chaos of everyone fighting each other while zombies are running around for the remaining food, water, and toilet paper.
But I really want to know who walked out of their front door, looked upon the end of civilization as we know it, and went, man, I'm gonna have to take some shits. I better stock up on 2-ply ASAP.
If you can somehow hold up on your own or find a camp of people you can trust, you will have to fortify and go on scavenge runs frequently for supplies, risking being potentially infected and hoping that someone can make a cure or being mercy killed before turning, or someone you know getting infected and them turning and biting everyone else in your camp. Withstanding the mutations of the freaks and what they can do to you, either slashing you open, ripping you in half in dozens of ways, or spewing gas on you or your vehicle, it will be extremely difficult to keep a healthy state of mind and body while keeping supplies up. Now say you do manage to outlast this pandemic. Well, 18 months in, it's not going to get any easier, as you will be forced to take the newly formed blood plague head on. By destroying its hearts, guarded by more aggressive and bloodied zombies with a more infectious disease. Or else their control, reach, and infectiousness via toxic gases will be too much to handle for this newly developing hive mind of flesh and bone. Time will not be on your side, as you eventually find yourself a ripped open, bloodied carcass walking this earth to potentially either mutate to become a bloodied freak, or just be a hobbled pile of biomass that a plague heart or wall will use to increase its influence, making the blood plague the dominant force on Earth, controlling every woman, man, and child. And from what the trailer for State of Decay 3 showed, even every animal will become these ravenous, carnivorous beasts and ready to kill. Are you ready to be eaten alive by a zombie deer, my dear? That wraps up this extended look into the supply-loving, blood-soaked franchise of State of Decay. 3 is on the way, and I'm sure a lot of what I discussed will either be right, wrong, or in between. I hope you enjoyed this scenario, and if you have any complaints on my accuracy or explaining how easy it would be for you to survive, please comment below. What do you want to see next? I'm currently away on vacation right now, but thanks to my wonderful editor Wisefish, was I allowed to record this weeks ahead of time and get this to you. Make sure to subscribe to him for awesome lore videos and get him to 50K by the end of this year. Make sure to support the channel by liking this video and subscribing, and maybe even donating in a number of ways like these cool as fuck people here. Check out my other videos in the Why You Wouldn't Survive series. And with that, I must bid you adieu. So stay happy, stay healthy, and stay well, my friends. Mwah.